Old long since. Life exists only at this very moment, and in this moment it is infinite and eternal. For the present moment is infinitely small. Before we can measure it, it is gone, and yet it exists forever. Alan Watts. She appeared out of the creamy blur of a drunken delirium. Emerging from the happy tumult of a singing, dancing crowd, suddenly she was there, resolved in sharp focus and vibrant colour. I caught my breath at the sight of her, at the scent of her. I remember it all so vividly. She was a celestial angel, born fully formed out of the mystery of the benighted universe, enhaloed in a soft bouquet of twinkling lights, like the stars. I've wondered many times, was it mere chance that we two came to be there just then? That our eyes met at that very moment, of all possible moments in the infinite ocean of time? Easy smiles were exchanged, and words spoken, though I forget just what was said. Those most ephemeral details are lost to me now, lost in time. Glances and words turned to touches as the hectic countdown began, and finally to our first tentative kiss. A kiss that lingered as around us the happy throng sang in the new year. The tip of my nose touched ice-cold glass as I leaned in for another kiss. Startled at that, my eyelids fluttered open. All about me was dark and cold and deathly silent. I shivered, sick and detached, like a premature newborn. I'd been asleep and dreaming of her. Now she was fading from my grasp with the departure of that dream. I jammed my eyes tightly closed, praying that pure force of will could transport me back to that dwindling dream memory, that I might return to her loving embrace. But it was too late. I was awake. Where in hell was I? Groggy and disorientated as I was, I found myself unable for the moment to recall just where I was, just what had preceded my awakening here, wherever here might be. I reached out, and my fingers touched cold, unyielding glass. What was this place? Slowly, a bearded face emerged faintly out of the darkness, mere inches from my face. It took me several seconds to realise I was staring at my own reflection. I stifled a rising sense of panic at the sudden notion that I was trapped in a coffin, perhaps already buried beneath the ground. No, that wasn't it. I was on the ship. Then it all came back to me. The long preparation, the launch, the expedition itself, the long slumber in the darkness. Now I was awake. That could only mean one thing, that our journey was drawing to a close, and we had arrived at our destination. Earth's nearest stellar neighbour, Alpha Centauri. The coveted triple-star system 2.4 light-years from home. I had been so proud to be selected out of all Earth's teeming billions to join the crew of the first pioneering mission to another star system. It had been the vindication of an unwavering ambition, the culmination of all my years of dedication and hard work and sacrifice. I joined NASA straight out of Cambridge. Lorna had joined me in Houston, supported me all the way. She'd put her life on the back burner just to be with me. Looking back, I never realised just how much her support meant to me. I love her so much. I loved her from that first kiss. She was bright and brilliant and beautiful. She was my soulmate. But as time went by, I immersed myself deeper and deeper in the work. Nothing came close. Nothing else mattered. Not family, not friends, and in the end, not even her. I took it all for granted. All that had mattered back then was that I'd be part of something truly historic. I was as weak as a baby when I exited the hibernation pod. Bones and muscles that had lain dormant were working again for the first time in years, and they complained bitterly. But a hot meal and an even hotter shower returned me to some semblance of normality. Since waking up, I'd been alone, and I guess I just assumed I'd been the first to be revived from hibernation. As chief engineer, that certainly made sense. After that meal, I took myself off to the observation deck to get my first close-up look at our destination, the red dwarf star Proxima Centauri. The vast, sprawling nebula that confronted me beyond the observation bay was not what I'd expected to find. It seemed limitless in expanse, immense purplish convolutions of bilious cloud, bulged and trailed in endless meandering loops and feathered strands. Here and there, gleaming clusters of hot young stars sparkled in the crystal clear blackness. And beyond it all, the swollen core of the galaxy, dense with stars, glowed through the drooping shrouds of dust. It was a magnificent, yet frighteningly unfamiliar sight, and I dropped heavily into a seat as I tried to puzzle out its meaning. I had no recollection of this anomaly, no memory of this location whatsoever, though I'd made an extensive study of astronomy as part of my training program. Nothing like this had appeared in my investigations. This was something new. I wonder if, perhaps, one of the stars of the Alpha Centauri system had unexpectedly gone nova at some point during our approach, its shredded remains expanding to form this new nebula. It seemed a remote, if not impossible chance. The stars of the Alpha Centauri system, being main sequence stars, were well known and well documented, and besides, from what I could tell, none of the familiar constellations of the night sky were in sight beyond the reaches of the nebula. Nothing was as it should have been. I was dumbfounded and confused, and at the back of my mind a deep suspicion was gathering. A suspicion whose desperate implications were almost too unsettling to contemplate.
Isn't it magnificent?
My chest tightened reflexively at that melodic feminine voice. Whirling around to face her in sudden alarm, I was nonplussed to find a ghost-like figure shimmering eerily in the dull half-light of the observation deck. Adele, the holographic interface for the vessel's AI computer core.
Oh, it's you,
I sighed, relaxing slightly.
Adele, where are we? What the hell is that?
I stammered, one hand indicating the interstellar vista. These were the first words I'd spoken in years, and they came stumbling out uncertainly.
It's a nebula,
she said matter-of-factly.
A nebula is an interstellar object characterized as a diffuse conglomeration of dust and or gases, visible as luminous clouds. Nebula often extend for many light years and...
Cut the crap, Adele,
I interrupted.
Where the fuck are we? This isn't the Alpha Centauri system, is it?
Her holographic eyes lingered on the majestic view for several seconds before she directed her gaze on me.
I'm sorry, Jack,
she said, pausing. Whether there was any hint of emotional inflection in that voice, I'm not certain. Not that it would have made any difference.
Jack,
she continued, her eyes locked on mine, eyes that never blinked, but shimmered with a haunting inner light.
Jack, things haven't gone entirely according to plan, I'm afraid.
I smiled mirthlessly.
What do you mean, Adele?
I looked at her levelly.
What does not gone entirely according to plan actually mean?
You're right, Jack. We're not at the Alpha Centauri system.
Okay,
I said slowly, a sense of agoraphobic panic swelling deep within me at this confirmation.
So, where exactly are we? Be specific.
She gazed out into the void, forefinger and thumb massaging her delicate chin in thought. Mimicking human body language was considered a key factor in communications with the crew, clearly imparting appropriate contextual cues and lending emphasis. At that moment, it just irritated me. I grew impatient with the delay.
Adele, where the fuck are we?
She answered without meeting my gaze.
As far as I can ascertain,
she said flatly,
somewhere on the outer fringes of Able 1432, in the Draco supercluster.
What?
I mumbled, shaking my head in disbelief.
No, that can't be right. That's insane. There must be some mistake in your reckoning. It's just not possible.
She waited for me to fall silent.
I'm quite sure, Jack.
No,
I don't believe you.
Our eyes met in silence for a long time, one pair ephemeral and eternal, just a glimmer of light, one pair solid, after a fashion, delicate and impermanent, constructed of fragile flesh, and condemned to wither and die.
I'm saying that we're very, very far from home.
I scratched my head frenetically, that sense of panic building within me, threatening to boil over into a hysteria of existential terror. I felt dizzy and sick. Suddenly the world canted over, and I collapsed to the floor of the observation deck, gripping the edge of my seat like a castaway, lost in a raging sea, clinging desperately to a shard of wreckage. It was some time before I could bring myself to speak again. When I did, my voice had lost all its brash resolve.
Where's the rest of the crew? They didn't make it, Jack. We've been out here some time. Most of the hibernation chambers failed along the way. Yours was the only one that held up.
I let that sink in.
So, I'm the only survivor?
That's right, Jack,
she said, without expression.
How can this have happened, Adele?
She pondered for a moment.
There were some technical issues,
she said. No shit, I muttered distractedly.
There must have been some problem with the navigation systems. The ship did not slow our descent on the Alpha Cen system, our designated destination. Instead, it traveled on.
How long have I been out here, Adele?
42 years.
42 years. It all seemed abstract. I couldn't make sense of it. When I tried to comprehend the magnitude of those three little words, I found that my mind just seemed to slide off the subject. Such was its impenetrability. 42 years asleep, hurtling headlong into the void. It was monstrous, inconceivable. 42 years at the constant 1G acceleration provided by our antimatter fusion drives. My fractured mind refused the work of calculating them out. It was simply too much to bear. I felt a sudden, crushing sense of loss and of hopelessness. For the next few days I prowled the ship like an unquiet spirit, like a ghost, eating and sleeping mechanically, lost in my own unsettling introspection. I spent most of my time gazing out at the immensity of that alien nebula and at the universe beyond, from the artificial womb of the observation deck. That tenuous connection all life feels for its home was a thread stretched beyond the breaking point. I experienced it as a physical pain, like the stripping bare of my soul, like the stark naked exposure of some cryptic second birth. In the end, I summoned Adele.
I have to go back, I said weakly. I can't live and die out here alone, Adele.
But Jack,
she replied, in a pleading tone that had been almost perfectly replicated.
Jack, there's nothing to go back to.
I sat in silence for a long time, as she watched me with those unblinking eyes. Eventually I sighed, dismissing her comment, my mind unwilling to apprehend and process its daunting truth.
Take me back, Adele,
I demanded with as much authority as I could muster.
Take me home.
And so I went back to sleep, and the ship headed home to Earth. Dreams and memories came to me in my long, slow slumber. Ephemeral visions of the life I'd led before my long sojourn into the darkness. I dreamt of people and places and the odd things that had meant so much to me back then. Those visions came in like old photographs in a dusty album that had lain hidden all this time, vignetted in soft focus and rendered in worn-out faded colour. I dreamt of my family, of my mother wiping toast crumbs from the corners of my mouth with a handkerchief on my first day of school, my father patiently teaching me to tie my own shoelaces, of my grandparents and their homely old house in the country, the place I'd always felt safest of all. I dreamt of Sammy, the floppy-eared crossbreed puppy I got for my 10th birthday, that little bundle of fluff that grew into my playmate and my best friend through endless summer days and winter nights. I dreamt of my long-lost school friends, Ben and Sadie, Alex and Candice, and all the rest of that ragtag bunch. I dreamt of the bullies too, and the fair weather friends. They had all played their part in shaping that little boy into the man. Moments were replayed in bittersweet procession, euphoria and pain by turns, in a vivid mosaic of emotions, of an intensity perhaps only accessible in youth, before the cynicism of adulthood dulls the senses, armouring them with metaphysical scar tissue. I dreamt of my time among the dreaming towers of Cambridge University, of professors and pals and problems to solve. Many lost moments and many forgotten faces haunted those endless dreams, but most of all, I dreamt of her. Warm sunlight cascades onto my skin. I've got my eyes closed, and I'm listening to the surf surging and receding on the shore, to the babble of happy playing children. I open my eyes, and she's there, immersed in her novel, oblivious to my gaze, her lithe, tanned body within reach of my hand. I stretch and relax, truly happy and wholly content with the world in that fleeting moment, perhaps for the last time. We made love that evening, made love like our ancestors, in a pure interlude of carnal passion. A pristine vacancy of mind characterized it, untainted and unsullied by cerebral interference. In that moment we were beings of matter and emotion only. There was no mind to observe and judge. It was real, authentic. It was perfect. At the time, I didn't know just how perfect it was. In my mind's eye, I can see her now, skipping lightly into the kitchen, a cheeky smile on her lips, her dark eyes flashing, catching mine and holding them, as they always did. I was sipping coffee at the table, checking my email. She had one hand hidden behind her back as she leaned over to kiss me.
I have 2 surprises for you, Jack. Now close your eyes and hold out your hand.
She smiled. I complied, forcing aside the thrill of annoyance I felt at her interruption of my morning ritual. It was a letter. I tore it open and scanned the text, a rush of excitement suddenly seizing me at what I read.
They want me. They want me to go,
I stammered, standing up.
They want me on the mission. I made the cut, Lorne. I got my ticket to the stars.
I looked up from the letter, into Lorna's eyes. She blinked, looking down briefly, then she smiled.
That's great, Jack,
she said, with a hint of regret. But I was barely listening. My mind preoccupied, already running away with daydreams of the mission, lost in 1,000 plans and preparations. I remember heading straight out, with the most cursory peck on her cheek as I left, all caught up as I was with my own concerns. She told me the night before the launch what her second surprise had been. She was pregnant. The lander module touched down hard, jolting me out of the sullen reverie that had dogged me since Adele had roused me from hibernation. My helmet intercom crackled, and Adele's thin electronic voice spoke close to my ear.
Welcome home, Jack.
After all those years in deep space, I had returned. A dull red glow cut a thin and sharply defined S in the blackness as the hatchway cracked open. The hatchway door slid smoothly aside, and I heaved my aging carcass upright, stepping out onto the once familiar surface of our old Earth. Overhead, the tainted sky was an inky black, flecked with a thin dusting of gleaming stars. Ahead, its blackness was fused with a deep blood red, where it was cut by the silhouette of the jagged horizon. The lander had come down in a barren plain that stretched endlessly around me, littered with fragments of shattered stone. Nothing moved in all that great expanse of dead matter, and I wondered if anything could survive in such a place. On a whim, I struck out, up the shallow incline that led to an outcrop of rocks, lining the top of the ridge ahead of me, my boots crunching on the carpet of splintered gravel. As I climbed, a blinding blade of crimson light reared above the horizon. It was the sun, rising ponderously ahead of me. The blade swelled into a vast dome enhaloed in fire. As I climbed to the ridgetop, it climbed higher still, and finally, as I crested the summit, its monstrous extent was revealed. Our sun hung, vast and bloody, over a desolate earth, its great bulk filling an eighth of the twilit sky. Its blistered surface crawling with activity, its immense circumference intermittently disturbed by the tumultuous tides within, loosed great arcs of looping flame into the night. And ever and again, it dimmed and flickered, leaving me momentarily in a disconcerting strobe-lit darkness. The sun, like the earth itself, was dying, its once eternal, life-giving light, feeble now, and ebbing away to the last. I dropped to my knees, sick at heart, and suddenly overcome by a crippling existential ennui. This was not what I had envisioned. The planned voyage should have taken 7 years to complete. The peculiarities of special relativity and the effects of time dilation at near light speed would have meant that 12 years would have passed back on Earth upon my return. I had told her that, had begged her to understand what the mission meant to me, had explained that in earlier centuries explorers had taken long leave from home and from family to undertake lengthy voyages of discovery, and that I would be part of that long tradition. I had promised to return to her, and she had relented. In truth, she had known for some time what my appointment to the crew would mean. But something had gone awry, and my unwanted sojourn into deep space had taken me to unimaginable speeds and unfathomable distances. The mind-bending effects of time dilation meant that my whole voyage had taken but a century. Cocooned in my hibernation pod with my biometric systems slowed, I had aged perhaps 20 years during all that time, while back on Earth, almost 5 billion years had slipped away. My arrogance and self-absorption, my single-minded obsession had brought me to this. My determination to do something meaningful, something historic, had led me here, to the end of time. I had lost everything. Everything I'd ever known was gone. All of human history, in fact, was wiped out. All art, all music, the science and scientists whose daring ingenuity had facilitated my trip were gone. Politics and philosophy, all the world's variegated cultures and religions, the concept of God itself, had vanished. Humanity was no more, along with all the wondrous biodiversity our Earth had ever brought into being. It was all lost to the ravages of time. Everyone I'd ever known, all my friends and colleagues, my family and my love, were no more. She was dead, and so was my child. The child I'd never met, never held in my arms, never taught, never loved. They were dead. Had died 5 billion years ago without ever knowing what had become of me, while I lived on, alone, the last human. Out of time, out of place, lost and alone at the end of time. I thought back to our first meeting, a chance meeting, and a moment that had slipped past billions of years before, and yet lived on, vivid and real in the grey cortex of this sole remaining human mind. It had been New Year's Eve, a new beginning for all, and for me, a chance meeting with the love of my life, the one I'd spurned for the cold vastness of interstellar space, and for the empty accolades of history, accolades that never came. Tears streamed down cheeks that had aged almost to unrecognizability while I had slept on in the darkness. And I sang, "Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and the days of old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet, for the sake of old